Welcome to Prosperity in a Pandemic. And today we are going to be talking with Melyssa Barrett. And she has been a great friend of mine for many years and decades now. And I really wanted to, bring you on the show, Melissa, to talk about, what's been going on in the world right now. And especially we could talk about the pandemic, but then other topics. But it's been 2020 has been a very interesting year, we could say. That's a soft way to put it.
That's a good
Well,
word. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it keeps us on our toes and keeps us thinking. And I guess that what I lead with this show, what I've been leading, the question I've been leading was when you noticed that the pandemic was not going to be short, that this is going to be going a while, and it looks like a long term, marathon, if you will. What became most important for you when you noticed that this was a long play?
Yeah, I think the challenge with a pandemic or with a situation like this, and quite frankly, 2020 itself has, it's been an interesting year to say the least. But I think my thought process is always about the people. And so when you have, employees where they have little kids at home that they're trying to homeschool or even, older kids, and yet they're expected to deliver, whether it be product or solution or whatever profession they're in. It's like, how do you support them while trying to achieve the goals that you have? And how are those goals going to be impacted based on the pandemic itself or the challenges that you have logistically?
Yeah, and you're right. What's going on from a human aspect, and like you said, bring it to the people, because I see all these different sides. I hear some companies, they've closed their offices. Like I have, some folks in real estate that I work with, and they're telling me that they're getting people. They're saying, "I'm selling my house. I don't, my company just told me they never expect me back in the office, so I'm going to go move back closer to my family, and I can work remotely." And then you see I just saw a Wall Street Journal article, I don't know if it was like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and they were saying, some companies are saying it's not working, but at what level? Because how much time did you give it? Some people probably took to it. They wanted to work from home for years, and now they're like, yes, I finally get to do it. And then other folks are like, I never wanted to do this. I didn't want to homeschool my kids. What the heck is going on? And they're trying to normalize. So at what point do you make a decision if it works or not works, or how do you know? I mean, I don't know. It's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's different for everybody depending on, what's going on in your life. I certainly had to make some changes, just in my own personal family. I had a daughter who was pregnant. I had a mom that was living in a place that, made no sense when she was over here. So, you have to make those life decisions as they occur, to make sure you're getting, what you need out of it. And I think that's why this process, I think, and all of the tools that you provide are so important, because I think it really allows you to discover things about yourself, but it also allows you to be more clear about those decisions because you're more connected with what you want to achieve.
Right. Which is when I how much I believe in this, so when we follow that, then the things align in our life, even if they might not seem as clear or what we grew up being taught. There's so many things that allow for alignment. That's what the word that comes, because then it aligns with what is you, what's going on with your family, what can you do with your career, and all of those things. And then you're right, it's different for company to company. Some companies, maybe they need their employees to be more in proximity, and then others, maybe it's okay to be vastly remote. What have
Right.
you found to be your biggest, if you will, like I like to use the word success? What's been a success point during this time? If you could highlight one of the biggest ones.
So, I guess probably my one of the biggest successes for me is really about connecting to my purpose. And I think, for me personally, I've had some tragedy in life. And so really just being able to understand, kind of find your voice, find your passion, and then connect it to your purpose. For me, that is prosperity. When you start talking about who you are, what you want to do, where you want to be, the legacy you want to leave. Because at the end of the day, that's what life is all about. So for me, that was probably the biggest success.
And when you at finding that voice and knowing your purpose and being able to put that out there, what is having had that do for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you create a renewed kind of energy, confidence. I think I'm more curious, a better collaborator. But I think you also become a little more bold with your thoughts, your leadership in terms of where you think things can go, your goals. Maybe you stretch a little further, a little harder, but you also start doing other things that connect your purpose together. So, I think sometimes we get busy, and although we're busy, we're maybe not bold, or we're driving in the car, or we're riding in the car, but maybe we're not driving.
Right, right, right.
And so just having a level of control to be able to focus not only professionally but in your own personal life, in terms of kind of connecting that purpose together, so that you're not thinking about life in compartments, but that you're really kind of connecting your life for all the things that you're doing across all those different elements.
So well said. Because now it's the boldness comes from like knowing, right? So it's like actually truly knowing. I think it's in those areas of fog or unknown where you're like, I think I know what I want, but I'm not sure. And when you have that ability, then you're able to have that boldness, which then puts you, like you said, into the driver's seat in all areas of your life. And then you even notice the things that you should let go of because you're like, oh, that's not serving my purpose. And then you can actually clear way for things that are more important, right? So it's
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
it's very, and can you share, thank you, Melissa, and can you share what before you had this clarity and have this extra energy and boldness come, like what was it like before that? But what were the, I don't know if there was like one, or maybe start with one like challenge that was maybe slowing you or stopping you from having this position that you have now.
Yeah, I think probably when I talk about just being busy. I think there's always something to do, right? There's always a goal that you're trying to achieve, whether it be in your business. There might be new products that you're trying to extend, or new data you're trying to deliver, or consulting that you're trying to provide. And I think part of the challenge is that you end up pulling things together, but you may not actually connect the dots. So when I start thinking about, diversity and inclusion, for example, and we're talking about identity of someone, like my identity is tied to my own, diversity, right? So my own
Right.
ethnicity. And so for me, when you start talking about, the challenges of what that means, it's really difficult sometimes for people to really, provide that outpour of information, emotion, connection. The
Yeah.
vulnerability that goes along with that can be really daunting. And quite frankly, sometimes, I don't know you like that.
Right, right,
And
right.
so sometimes when you're at, whether you're at work or, doing other things, that can be really challenging to kind of figure out how far do you really go, and what do those conversations and that dialogue really look like?
And finding that space and balance of vulnerability, like when and where is appropriate, like, and in this conversation, how do you think that affects you or others when this occurs?
Yeah, so especially with specific conversation, and I think I'll continue on diversity and inclusion as the example, because I think what happens is it is such a deep thing, especially for people that have been marginalized, and the connection to images that you see on TV, or things that microaggressions that people say, or any of those things, they create a significant amount of emotion. And so, if you're talking about some of the events that you see on TV, for example, where clearly there is social and racial injustice occurring in front of you, you have people that are coming to the table that are, not only angry, but thoroughly exhausted, and upset, and yet I've got to pivot and make sure I'm doing my job right. So
Yeah.
there is this level of rawness, where you're trying to make sure that you're taking care of everything you need to take care of, and yet the very item you need to be focused on is yourself and
Right.
how you take care of yourself. So I
Yeah.
think that's probably the biggest challenge is, when you're going through things like this, especially with such a level of uncertainty, just being able to tap into yourself and, spend more time understanding yourself, and really kind of creating those components of purpose for yourself. I think it provides a lot more clarity for you as a whole, and the mindfulness, this connectedness that you get as a result, just makes your whole life kind of come out in bloom. And when you think about a pandemic like this one, you don't think about additional development and growth, and those are typically not the words that you would hear when you're going through something like that. But it can really be a time of great reflection, to try and help you focus on what's important.
It's and it is the circle of life in a sense, like when you look at the forest, and I recently learned this. Do you know when a tree dies, whatever energy it has left, it disperses it to all the neighboring trees and like all the ground, like so all, and that's even if you look at it, the most nutrient dense soil is where what you would say, actually, just to be really raw about it, where death has occurred, because when
Yeah,
those trees die and all that deciduous matter goes back into the earth and it brings all this back. So it's crazy to say, and even I was just got tingles saying all this, but it's like, you know uh change is this is all part of change, and
yeah,
and I it's not being insensitive. Everyone's going through different levels and layers, but in the end, all of this is learning for our life, and it all is change, and change comes with this full circle. So there's going to be grief. There's going to be times where it does feel good, and then also new flowers can blossom at the same time, or really close period of time, but
yeah,
we have to feel all of that. And I think, what I'm feeling from you and what you're saying is like, well, one, I think I'm a fan of feelings. Like we need to feel them, and I didn't always used to be that. I used to hide it and push it down and not feel it. But obviously, when
suppress it. Yeah,
yeah, when you feel it, you can actually move through it, move past it. And I hear what you're saying. It's like the difficult times is like, first, we're already going through all this, then all this social unrest and all these things happening at the same time. And people, frankly, they're getting sick of sitting at home or, not getting out. So you're like, kept in all these layers at the same time in our world,
yeah,
are going to bring a lot of emotions. And if you try to suppress that, for any period of time, then we all know what happens when you like hold something down too long. It just builds and it builds. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
And this is why I wanted you on the show too, because you have such a passion for this. So just to get a little more context, I know this is really in an area of your core purpose. So maybe if you can share like your core purpose or your vision of like what you're working on, like what your heart is driving you towards.
Yeah. So as a seasoned product executive, my focus is really to take diversity, inclusion, and equity and build it into the business, not only as from a consulting standpoint, but literally when you think about how you're doing business, with whom you're doing business, what the use cases are, how you are developing your core purpose as a business. um, Diversity and inclusion should be, kind of that baseline. So whether you're talking about retention, representation, a lot of folks are looking at representation, um, and they're looking outside to bring people into the company.
Right.
But they forget sometimes that there is a whole focus that is on retention.
Right.
And the folks that are there are really looking for some specific attention on them. They're already in the door. And
Right.
so being able to translate messaging and information in a way that allows not only for us to build the community, but really to retain the community and that company culture. Some people don't like the term company culture, but I will guarantee you when somebody comes in, especially if they are the only one or one of a few, that community is really important.
Right.
Especially if they're trying to learn how to navigate the company, where to go, how to learn the job. So some of those things are really important, and it's easy for us to take a look at, at the CEO level and say, these are our goals. And even if you look at people walking in the door that are in newer positions, they're anxious, excited. They have a renewed interest for whatever job that they're coming into. At the end of the day, there is this process of, how you are developing and growing within the company, and how you decide to, get rid of, you know, challenges that end up in the middle of that. And so you have CEO driving things down. You've got the folks that are trying to grow with the company, and then there's this middle portion of management that is trying to figure it all out. And so the challenge is how do you make that part of your business so that you're not focusing on an initiative per se as diversity
Yeah.
and inclusion, but how do you layer it into every initiative you're doing?
Right. Right. And how do we make so it's so much more because when you look at it as a number of representation, like that's never worked for me like because I mean there's obviously something to get movement, so okay, great, but then it's like what you're saying, what then okay, we have a number, okay, now what, and where's the human aspect of it, where now going to your point, which I'm totally for, this is like how do we retain, and even just business studies, just for a second to even talk about, is that you look at some of big success these days are ones where there is massive attention to retention. Even this is many years ago, Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh, that book, it was all about Zappos and how he nurtured everyone. And he didn't get as deep in diversity and inclusion specifically, but it plays the same role. It's saying that we need to focus on how we make up our workforce, how we treat them, how we take care of them, how we nurture. And then why I'm bringing this up is that it also had a massive ROI because they were able, the
Yes.
most expensive thing is bringing new people in and training them. It's
Yeah,
so expensive.
absolutely.
So if that's
Yeah.
there, right? if we, and we know this, and it's been many studies, we know that this is pretty like spot on, like no one really has many arguments against this, then how can we not put our attention in this area like you're saying? Like why it just makes
Right.
so much sense. How do we take
Yeah.
care of people,
Yeah,
right?
because at the end of the day, you want only a certain level of attrition, right? And you certainly want to be able to keep your best employees throughout their career and provide them opportunities. So I think for me, because I have a varied background in, product as well as, finance. But, as I think of financial education, for example, so I sit on the board for a nonprofit called Balance. And one of the things they do is financial coaching, smart money
Yeah.
coaching. And when I start thinking about, economic justice, we're talking about the connection of allowing different ethnicities or underrepresented populations to thrive. And from an economic standpoint, how do you do that? I mean, companies play a significant role in employing people and
Right.
communities. And so, you talk about the circle of life. I mean, it's that is exactly what we're looking for is, from a racial justice, social injustice perspective, but how do we bridge the gap and get to financial justice, right? And economic empowerment.
Well, and then that's what you and I have had many conversations before this, and that's what gets me the most is yeah, we can talk about ROI. That's kind of a trigger point for companies. It's like, hey, wake up. It's obviously good for business, and that does cause a wake up call. But ultimately, where my heart is like, what are we doing, as you said, for the people, for all people? Like, how are we helping? To nurture that. And when you come to this, it's for me, it's kind of lifting that side up, giving more attention, like you said, helping them feel how everyone feel. Because when you have a thing, the wherever you grow up, and this is where people get into this whole like thing, because some people, they don't even understand privilege. We talk about white privilege or different things, and that's because you're living in it. You have never looked at anything else. And some of the I told you once that I was speaking, and and it just so happened, I don't know how it was a coincidence, that I was reading the paper and Carlos Slim took #1 position at that right on that day to be the richest man in the world. And then I was speaking, and a Mexican boy came up to me and he said, "Steve, this is great what you're saying. But I'm Mexican. I'll never have money." And I was like, "Oh wow, so I guess you don't know who Carlos Slim is." Just in that moment, I had that information, and then he said no, and I said, "Oh well, he's the richest man in the world today. I just read it in the paper. You can go look it up, and he's Mexican." And that just that made a reframe. Now, is that everything that young boy needs? Absolutely not. But just having even that, because and I know this is just one small thing, but it's not small, right? It's like, how do we? So I guess I'm curious. What would you say?
Yeah.
I have thoughts in my own mind. What's the first thing that we can start to do to like be more active in nurturing this, so we can lift uh, the cultures up? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I mean, I'm not going to say that there's a silver bullet in terms of how to, cure all of the, injustice that has been created. But I think from my perspective, I think first and foremost comes some level of acknowledgement, or even just being able to have some empathy, to
Right.
understand how people have had to deal with all of this for generations. I mean, like my ancestors, my relatives, my husband, I mean, let's get really real. There have been lots of things. My son, these are people that are close,
Yeah.
and they make differences in my life, for sure. So when you have compassion for someone else, that's when you start to really, be able to chip away at those beliefs and values, the environment that you're in, the behaviors you want to create. To me, just acknowledge that yes, there are issues. Let's start there, and then we can begin to, you know, at least start to heal. And I think there's been this, kind of process where, I mean, we have an explosion of emphasis on diversity and inclusion these days, which is fabulous. But at the end of the day, I go, okay, so what are we doing, and
Yeah.
what does this look like, 10 years from now? Because quite frankly, we shouldn't have to have an entire industry dedicated to diversity and inclusion. It should be the way we do business, right?
Right, right, right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the dream, right? That's where we want to head. And then I agree with you. Like I always say, the first step of change is awareness. Because when you don't have awareness, then how do you change anything? Because you're just like going along, do 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 do, and then it's like,
Yes.
oh, So bringing more awareness, then comes choice. Then now,
Yeah.
okay, what are the choices that we're going to make? And let's let they don't all have to be gigantic, because that can be fearful for people, like but you're right, there's a lot of anger and there's been a lot of suppression of a lot of things, and now it's exploded. In some cases there are folks that want to flip the table upside down and say, but that it's one of my coaches said it's like a pendulum, and she was doing it with sexism. She said, there are people right now that look at men as broken women, and this is a woman talking. She said, this is not okay either. It's like the pendulum, when it's gone, it was so far one way, and naturally it's going to swing and try to go back the other way. But this is
Right.
us in a pendulum. We can choose to not let it go all the way to the other side, because on any extreme is where we get in trouble. If we can have some
Absolutely.
neutrality,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know there's no silver bullet, but I do think, it's really helpful to start talking about, what are the few steps we should be thinking about taking now? So,
Yeah.
so first awareness, then would there be like a second thing? Like what's the next thing that's coming to mind for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the focus has to really, study and, provide a lot more research on some of the issues. Because I think, if you work in the medical field, for example, you're hearing a lot about social determinants of health, for example. And, the migration to suburbia, where you had, marginalized communities, kind of transitioned to particular areas, and then, essentially rejected in lots of ways financially if you lived in that specific area. Um, you have, you know, just continued challenges with, um, and you may not even know why, in terms of, what that does from a social determinant of health perspective, how it impacts you, your body, your relatives. And
Right.
so, we see today where the pandemic is having, undue, kind of effect or impact to, underrepresented communities, whether you're Black or Latin. And a lot of that, you know, I think is pulled from all of those issues of social determinants of health as we talk about them today. So I think it's just challenging because we don't even know all of the effects of, 400 years of slavery or, marginalization of communities. And I think we're starting to see that more. But I do think, we have to be open to what that means and, not boil the ocean per se, because I think there are things we can do in our lifetimes that make a difference.
Yeah.
There are things I can do today that will make a difference to someone. So I don't want to get, overly, kind of academic about it, but we need to learn how to connect with others, and be able to empathize with others, but then really understand what will build the momentum that we need to fill some of the gaps that we see.
Absolutely, and what popped in my mind right now, because I absolutely agree with you. The big things are big, and anything big, like I always use the analogy. If we have the best pizza, because I'm Italian, right? So I think in food, but you have the best pizza, and you put the whole pizza in your mouth. You're not even thinking about how good the pizza is anymore. Now you're trying to breathe, right? And it's like any big thing, we have to take it to bites so we can chew that one bite successfully. But you're absolutely right. Like I get concerned about education and food and finance and all of these things that are hit on these areas. And if people think that that's not true, then they need to start, like you said, looking at the research. Because when you have when you're looked at a certain way and you have less opportunity, then and there are breakthrough opportunities. But when you look at a whole thing, and this is where you're saying we could get academic, we could start breaking down how this starts to systemically create patterns, and we do need to work on that. But then right now, I love where you brought it. So putting that aside for a second, not even too long, because we got to keep working at it. You got to keep pecking at it. But the reality is, how do we treat each other on an individual level? And I think one of the things that popped in my mind right now is asking more questions. How are you? Like, just hearing all the stories. Do you know how many more of my friends have told me stories they never told me before, like in the last 3 months? And I'm like, whoa,
Yeah,
why didn't you
yeah,
share that with me before? Well, I don't want to be negative all the time. And a lot of us, like you and I too, we're very positive. So you don't tell me like all the bad things every time I pick up the phone with you. So, for everyone out there, I would say, and I just want to hear your echo of this or what you think, Melyssa, but I'm saying just go ask, how are you? And be real about it. Not like, how are you? Hi, bye. It's
yeah,
what's going on. And like, and even maybe asking, this is where you get vulnerable. How is this affecting you? Like, what's going on for you and your family? And then start to hear the stories. Cause believe me, for me, it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know this. And I just need to listen and hear. So I would say on the individual level, just
yeah.
start asking more questions. I don't,
Yeah, no, I mean, I talked about that before. I think it definitely, the more curious you are, I think it allows you to connect to people, or at least understand how far they'll allow you to go. And so to the extent that I mean, asking people how they are these days is a loaded question.
it's
And a
huge.
lot of a lot of people will say, oh, I'm fine. It's like, are you though? Are you really fine? Like, are you okay? Because a lot of people were dealing with stuff well before the pandemic hit. And now it's more challenging because of them having to deal with all of this on top of what they were dealing with before. So I think it's, how are you is definitely a challenging question, but be willing to ask the second or the third question. If they say
That's
they're fine, like, are you really fine? Is there anything I can do? Like, how is it
yeah,
affecting you?
yeah,
Because I think
and then
sometimes we don't even know how it's affecting us.
that's it, or even an outlet to voice it, because we're so much in the daily grind. Like you said, all this is going on. You have all these emotions, plus then you're supposed to still show up for work if you have a job, or you're like, oh, what am I going to do because I lost my job? And you're like in a whole world. You're not even thinking about these things. So maybe just a few questions. I know we're over time here a little bit, but I didn't want to drop this right where we were. But I think what comes to mind is like, what's most important to you right now? What is, even just being direct, what's slowing you down, challenging you, what's affecting you right now? Like, if you can build rapport with someone and ask them what's important to them, like what's most important to you and your family right now during this time, and then find out, and then, like Melyssa just said, ask the follow-up questions. Those are the most important, and it might take 3 or 4 questions to actually get them to say, you know what, this is what's really going on, let me tell you. And whoa, and then they dump it, right? And it's like,
Yes.
oh my, right?
Like,
So
oh my
um
goodness, what is going on, right? How can we address it? How can we help?
and then there
Yeah.
comes the awareness, right? Because now my awareness is
Yes.
higher. and on both sides, because like you just said, sometimes we're not even voicing it. We might be feeling this way inside, but might not even to our partners, to our spouses, to our family, our kids, we might not even be voicing what's going on. So if you can be that friend to to ask more questions, I guess that, you
Yeah.
know.
And I think, even as, just kind of bringing it back to the business, I mean, I think business and personal now are a bit merged, right? You're sitting in my house right now, because I'm at
Right.
home, right? So you
Right.
have this connection to home and personal and business, and so being able to provide that connection, I think, really benefits, not only the person, but the connection to your overall goals, wherever you sit in the company.
Yeah.
So I think those are things, just to kind of make sure that we're, there. It's a loaded, process when you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. But there are lots of things we can do in terms of taking action. Being able to just say thank you to people,
Yeah.
that have completed an activity is nice. And so there are so many things that we can do, in our everyday lives. But the success of that is really kind of making sure that we are taking that time to create the mindfulness, the success that we really want in our life.
Yeah. Yep. It's and thank you for sharing this time with me. And I'm sure that we're going to have to do more of this, because as we continue to uncover, you know, more information, then there'll be more to share. But I think this has been a beautiful little journey for this short period of time to discuss, this. And I love kind of where we end is, just as simple as it sounds, just be open, opening your heart and open and ask questions and listen. Just it's
Yeah.
I think as simple as that is a good first step right now for a lot of people.
Don't be
Yeah.
afraid to have the dialogue. That's right.
That's it. That's it. Well, I so appreciate you coming on the show today, Melissa. And
Thanks
I
for having
so
me.
it's my pleasure. And what you're doing is so important. And we're here to help and support in any way that we can. And so just keep doing your good work.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay, well, until next week, we'll see you. This was Prosperity in a Pandemic, and we're every Tuesday at 2:15, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in.